Hello, I am Orange Cat, and today I'm going to be reviewing an episode from season 21 of Arthur. This was the previous season, not the season that debuted this past week. And I'm reviewing an episode I have actually mentioned in both of my Arthur reviews. This episode titled Arthur Takes a Stand. In this episode, you see Arthur standing up for Mrs. McGrady, who has to do now breakfast and lunch for the school, and is also probably most well known for its usage of Representative John Lewis. Okay, now let's do a brief plot synopsis of the episode so I can get into my points about it. First, you see the kids in a lunch line for breakfast, and they're like, wow, we have breakfast and lunch now at the school. I like this. But then, like, Arthur sees, like, Miss McGrady looking tired. It's like, I don't know. I mean, it must be really hard because one person has to do both breakfast and lunch for the entire school, right? And the other kid's like, I guess. Like, hey, how about we, like, go to, like, Miss Tingley, who's, like, the assistant principal, and tell her, hey, we should get Miss McGrady an assistant, right? So then Arthur's sitting outside the office right at the end of school. The other friends all forgot about it. And then Arthur comes in to Miss Tingley's like, hey, Miss McGrady has to do a lot of work. Do you want I think it'd be cool if we got her an assistant. She's like, well, we don't really have the money for it right now. We're only allotted a certain amount of money for labor and stuff for the school. But hey, the breakfast was great today, right? And Arthur's like walks away kind of depressed about the whole thing about the man, I wish I could do something, Miss McGrady. So then Sue Ellen tells him, oh, if you have an issue, then just like boycott the breakfast, right? And Arthur's like, okay, cool. So what Arthur does is that he puts these flyers into every locker in school saying, oh, help out Miss McGrady, boycott breakfast, right? And then Miss McGrady pulls Arthur aside, like, what the hell are you doing? It's actually my idea that I wanted breakfast because you have these kids who, a number of these kids don't get breakfast at home. So I thought I should give them another meal during the day for sure, right? So, like, and then Arthur, seemingly unfazed by this, it's like the next day at school. No, he like sleeps in the library. Remember this part? And he has like a nightmare about it. Wakes up, and then, unbeknownst to him, John Lewis is sitting next to him. He's like, "Oh, I had this nightmare about my lunch lady who has to do all this work." And he's like, "Oh, if you have something bothering your conscience, then do something about it." I forgot what he exactly said. It was basically that. So then Arthur so then, like, the next day at lunch, at the end of lunch, everyone's walking. Arthur just sits down. It's like, hey, Arthur, and she leaves. Like, no, I'm sitting down here until Miss McGrady gets her help. And then it's like 20 minutes later, Sue Ellen's like, hey, I heard you're sitting here. Oh, cool. This is like a sit. And Arthur's like, okay, what's that? Oh, it's when you sit in until you get something you want. And it starts this whole thing where a bunch of other kids sit down, including Mrs. McGrady at this point. This teacher's like, what are you doing? Go to your classroom. Class has already started. Miss McGrady's like, sorry, I'm not doing this until I get my assistant. And then perfect timing, walking in was John Lewis, like, hey, what's going on here? Where's the auditorium? It's like, you're John Lewis. She's like, yes, I am. Oh, hey, Martha. It was Miss McGrady. It's like, oh, hi, John. Like, wait, you know each other? Like, oh, yeah, we knew each other. We were totally hung out during the March on Washington. And I'm like, oh, okay, fine, you get your assistant. That's basically how the episode ends. Now I guess I'll go into some I've mentioned in both my videos, some of my qualms with this episode. First off is I think it's very clear they're trying to tackle the whole concept of justice and like civil disobedience in this episode. However, it doesn't really work that well in this context, right? I understand where they're coming from. Like, we want to do an episode about civil disobedience. We want something that can plausibly happen in this school that at the same time, like young children can digest because it's Arthur. Its audience is much younger than me. Audience is probably somewhere between like 5 and like 12 or so. I guess I'll roughly guess the age range for Arthur is. And a lot of these kids they haven't learned in school about the whole civil rights movement, about the March on Washington, about the whole concept of usage of civil disobedience. So it's like, okay, let's just have lunch lady have a lot of work, and then she's not getting helped for it. However, I think this falls apart because partially because it is Ms. McGrady that wanted to do the breakfast in the first place. This whole concept goes down to Ms. McGrady putting work on her that she was not necessarily asked to do in the first place. And at the same time, it's not like the school straight up said, we'll never get her an assistant. Oh, she should work there. She's so damn lazy. or anything implying any term of direct discrimination. It was just, oh, we don't have money in the budget for it right now. And what do you know? They could have not had money in the budget for an assistant in the kitchen at that time. Because at the same time, seeing like Ms. McGrady just asked them on the spot, can I do breakfast? And they allowed her. It's not like they were preparing in the school year to have breakfast served to all the kids and didn't prepare for the necessary labor in the kitchen for that. So at the same time, the whole circumstance around this doesn't really necessarily add up based on that. And also later, it's like the weird thing at the end is you could talk about, well, Arthur uses a sit-in because it's like the 1950s and 60s where sit-ins were used as a weapon in the civil rights movement. This didn't come off like that. Like, no one at this point told him, oh, by the way, in the civil rights movement, people would sit in until they got what they wanted as a form of protest. It just really came off as Arthur being like, no, I'm sitting here because I don't want to do anything else than to make sure Mr. Gray does it. In the context of this episode, it seems like he's throwing a pissy fit and he's just sitting there to be stubborn. And it, and again, like your audience are young children, they've probably not learned about the civil rights movement. They've probably never learned about the concept of using sit-ins as a form of protest. So really, for like say a 4 or 5 year old, they're like, wow, I can get what I want if I just sit down and keep demanding for it, not understanding the whole context of it. And the show, I think, was in trying to imply the context, but then with children that young that haven't learned about the civil rights movement, you have to downright say, oh, by the way, there was a bunch of racial tensions in the 50s and 60s. There was a general nonviolent movement used to combat this racism and combat systematic discrimination, and they use nonviolent means. And Arthur is just trying to continue on that tradition. It was never phrased like that. It was phrased like, oh, if you can get what you want by just sitting there and demanding for it. And at the same time, like, you're not necessarily teaching the kids anything if you're not giving them that proper context to it. And also, one moment I have to admit was kind of funny this episode was when all the kids were joining Arthur in the sit-in, like Muffy at one point pulls out her phone and she's like, fight the power, and takes a selfie, which I think this was unintentional. About this seems to indirectly make fun of quote unquote slacktivists, like the type of people that would just like walk up to like a Black Lives Matter rally, take a picture of them there, and be like, "Hey, look how woke I am! Look how much of a difference I'm making!" without really doing anything at all. Doing it to make Instagram stronger. You're not doing it because you seriously believe in the movement or commit yourself to any cause whatsoever. It's activism. And to be fair, Muffy would seem like the perfect character to be a slacktivist. So I think that was actually unintentional. I don't think the show was trying to make fun of that, but at the same time, it would have been more awesome when she said "Fight the Power" for "Fight the Power" by Public Enemy, just start blaring because that'd be hilarious. That would turn Arthur into do the right thing immediately. That'd be hysterical. Kind of messed up because again, this is for like 5, 6 year olds, but been hilarious, you know. The Flava Flav just come right in. Oh my god, that'd been hilarious. Too bad. Man, that'd be awesome if Flavor Flav did an episode of Arthur. I mean, they got Representative John Lewis. They've got a whole bunch of other people. Like I said, they already got what's her name? I already forgot her name. The mean gym teacher from Glee. Do an episode this season, so they can get people to do it. But and again, like this whole thing with John Lewis, it just felt more than anything else that they wanted to do an episode about civil disobedience and like who can we get? And like, oh, we got John Lewis, and be like, okay, how do we fit him into this episode? And it was one of those things that just felt like it's just like what the Simpsons have an issue at sometimes these days. You would have you would get your celebrity guest, but you wouldn't have an episode ready. So then you do something like The Simpsons with something like the episode Lisa Goes Gaga, which is about Lady Gaga, or the episode about Elon Musk, where they didn't know what to exactly do. They just know they had to work it around the celebrity guest they had. So it's like, okay, let's just fit John Lewis in a couple points. Like, let's have him in the library talk to Arthur. And then let's have him participate in the sit-in at the end of the episode. That'd be cool. Like, yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's write it like that. So then, and again, it's like it's season 21, so it's just like a lot of different shows. When you get to a certain point, you just start writing cookie cutter at best plot lines. That's what it felt like let's just walk from beat to beat to beat, and then oh look, it's 11 minutes and we can stop writing. And that's just a general thing for late season episodes. Like a lot of the season 22 episodes of Arthur are the same thing. Like the only standout episodes for me were the two I already did reviews on. So, what do you guys think? Do you agree with my opinions on this episode? Do you disagree? Leave your comments down below. Do you like this content? Do you want more content like this? Please subscribe. Please hit the notification button. Thank you very much for your support. I am Orange Cat, and that is all.